Tonight, in this episode, we are going to be talking to Jerry Marzinsky and Lynn Monet in an article called Demons Are Real. We're going to be taking this a step further tonight and exploring other realms. And we're trying to do it in a very concise way, which will have meaning and interest to the people out there. So I'm going to get on with the show now and bring in Jerry and Lynn. So first of all, we're going to speak to Jerry, and Jerry's going to introduce Lynn.
Good to be on with you again, Mark. I met Lynn serendipitously. I think you wrote me.
I did, yes.
Yeah. And when I made an appointment to listen to her story, and what was so interesting is Lynn was able to see spirits from a young age, and she wasn't discouraged by her mother from doing so. So as she was telling me this information, she said she spent an internship on a psych ward, and that got my attention really quick. She was able to see the voices that these people suffer from, the things that the psychiatric mafia say are hallucinations. Now, the psychiatric mafia would diagnose both me and her as psychotic for what we know. Now, they've had 35 years to lock me up, and they haven't touched me. And I've been working side by side with them in psych hospitals, mental health centers, emergency rooms. I'm still here. And I'm not on a psych ward, never was, other than working there. All right, so we're both totally sane. And I want Lynn to kind of tell her story, because I've heard from others who have tried to record the voices, and they said they had them. But when I listened to their recordings, I couldn't make out anything. But Lynn says she has seen these things, and I'd like to turn this over to her and let her tell you about what she saw on the psych ward associated with those patients. So I'm going to bow out and let her tell you about the psych ward first, and then let her go wherever she wants to go from there.
Thanks, Jerry. Just before Lynn comes in, I might come in with some questions, Lynn, if that's okay, just to clarify certain things for myself and the listeners, but do carry on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, first of all, Mark, for having me, and Jerry for inviting me in on this. My name is Lynn Monet. I have been a nurse for 38 years. 17 years of that has been in end-of-life care. I've also done management. I have a degree also in biological science. At one point, and responsible. And this particular day, there were 8 nurses and a teacher that brought us there. We were all standing together, the 8 students, as the teacher went to get our assignments. And there was this young woman in the intake area, looked to be about 20 years old. And she walked over to us standing there, and she pointed and she said, "You can help me. I know you can." And of course, in that moment, I was feeling a little embarrassed and hoping that she was not talking to me, that hopefully she was talking to someone else. I didn't want to be Lynn the weirdo that day. I wanted to be Lynn the student nurse. And the teacher immediately came and said, "Don't make eye contact, don't converse." And she ushered us out of the room. However, I was then placed back into the intake area with another nurse. And we were sitting, they had picnic tables that were bolted to the floor. And I was sitting at that picnic table with the other nurse. We were doing our charting, and the young woman sees us, and she comes over and she sits down at the picnic table with us. And as she's sitting there with us, she's telling us her story about how her pastor started molesting her when she was 10 years old, and then her mother remarried at 14, and the stepfather started raping her, and about how she ran away at age 16. And she said that she hears 25 different voices. And I'm sitting next to this woman, and this woman was covered in claw marks. They looked like cat scratches. I've seen them before in a house that I had purchased that was so haunted that I was never able to move into, but a friend of mine was clawed to the point of bleeding. And these claw marks on this woman were the same. They were coming out of her ear, out of her nose. I mean, she had these claw marks on her in places that it would have been impossible for her to have done them to herself unless she was a contortionist. And she was sitting there telling me that the voices, that one of them has a very, very long claw, and that it claws the inside of her female parts. And of course, the facility was blaming these claw marks as being self-inflicted. And I'm like, my God, she's got demonic claw marks all over her. So as the young woman, it was her turn to go in with the therapist or her group therapist, whatever it was. But she was at that time called away to go to whatever appointment that she had. As she got up and started to walk away in the direction, I'm looking at her, and I can see it appeared to be like a Santa Claus bags over each shoulder. They appeared to be about as big as standard pillowcases. And I'm saying that like clear standard pillowcases. And I'm only saying that because of the way that the heads were clustered together on each side of her back. They looked like grapes being clustered together, but yet they were misshapen, kind of like potatoes. And the eyes sometimes were inverted. So sometimes the eyes were on the bottom, the mouth on the top. There were other ones sideways and things like that. And I remember seeing this on this woman, and I thought to myself, no joke, she really is hearing 25 different voices. That poor woman, she's got attachments on her. So about an hour passes, and the lady returns, and I am passing her room, and I see that she's in there, and I knock on her door frame and ask if I can come in. And she, of course, invites me in, and her words are slurring. She's so heavily medicated. And I said to her, I said, listen, I said, I want to tell you something. I said, and if you repeat this, they're going to think that you're crazy. I said, and they're going to keep you in here longer. I said, they're not going to believe you. I said, but I believe that you are hearing 25 different voices, and I believe that you've got attachments on your back. I can see the attachments on your back. When you get out of here, you need to find someone that can help you remove these things, and that you won't be hearing the voices. And she kind of turned to walk more into the room. She seemed to be a little bit agitated with what I was talking about. She turned away from me to walk towards her bed. And as she turned, I could see that there was, and again, I say like clear bags because I don't know how else to describe how they were held and clustered together. There was more of a clustering, but she had these horn-looking, the consistency of a horn, on an animal, like a ram or something, but more clear. And they were kind of twisted like a grapevine, attached at the very top of her shoulders, and they C-clasped underneath her armpits and connected that way on her back. So they looked like this connected on her back. And as she turned to walk away from me, I at the time, I wasn't planning on removing anything from her. When you do clearings of demonic things and taking attachments off of people, you have to be overflowing with energy because they will drain you. And also, I had things going on in my life. I didn't want to have those attachments attaching to me or following me home. So I had planned on not doing anything other than telling her. But when she turned away from me, started to head forward, something just compelled me. I was overwhelmed with this rush of energy. And I took my fingers and just put them underneath the horn things and lifted the attachments off. And when I did that, the attachments started to fall away onto the ground. I tried to stomp as many into the ground as I could. I was just going with what I felt that I needed to do. And the woman, it turned, and some of them did roll off, and there were some around her bed area. The woman turned and she said to me, it felt like you were pulling grass off of my back. Now, she didn't see me doing that energetically, but she felt it. I personally was very, very shocked at how easy the attachment came off of her and the fact that it did fall away as soon as I had pulled it away. And I told her, I said, look, I have just pulled the attachments off of your back. This is a temporary fix. Some of them have rolled under, some are near your bed. They may reattach. I'm sure you probably have some in your home that you're living in. You still need to go and find someone when you get out of here to remove the rest of these attachments. And she nodded her head in agreement, and she was more open to listening. She didn't have that frustrated look on her face anymore, like she was going to come at me almost. She seemed to be more calm with having the things removed and nodded in agreement. So I kid you not, a year later, I'm in a store here that we call Walmart. And I'm squatting down in the aisle looking at candles, and there are these two young women at the end of the aisle, and they're whispering to each other, and they're talking, and they're looking at me. And of course, I'm wondering if I have got toilet paper on my shoe or something, so I'm checking myself. And all of a sudden, one of the girls says to the other one, I know that's her. I'm going to go over and say something. So she walked over to me, and I stood up, and she said, do you remember me? Well, I kind of recognized her, but I couldn't place her because this young woman looked so much different. When I had seen her in the facility, she had very, very short hair. She had a little bit of weight on her, and she was very pasty from being drained and darkened around her eyes from being exhausted, from constantly being drained from these parasitic attachments, negative attachments that were on her. And here she stands, this beautiful woman. She's lost weight. She's got this beautiful blonde bob and her makeup on, and she's just smiling. And she said to me, you're the nurse. You're the nurse that helped me. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, you look amazing. How are you? And she said, well, I'm finishing my first year of dental hygiene school. I'm going to be a dental hygienist. And she says, and now I'm off all of my schizophrenic medication, and I'm only taking something for mild anxiety. So she told me that she did go and find a priest or somebody that helped assist her in removing the rest of what was on her, that she went and found the help. And lo and behold, I mean, she now had a life ahead of her that was, something, more normal, that she would have been institutionalized for the rest of her life. And now here she was actually living a good life and going forward with a profession. So I was very thrilled with that. But with that being said, after I saw that on her, we were in the facility for the whole week. And I can continue if you want me to. I didn't know if you had any questions, but do you want me to?
Just finish that section off. That's very interesting.
Okay, so in the facility, I then, because we were there for a whole week, and that was my first day, and of course I was placed in different sections. I was placed in this one section that was very, very heartbreaking because it was considered the area of the people that were basically forgotten by their families. These people were in there long term. No one ever came to visit them because they thought they were crazy and wouldn't recognize them anyway. And I was placed there, and there was this sweet little woman, and she's sitting at this round table that has 4 chairs, and she's sitting in one of the chairs, and she's having this conversation at the table as if as if she's taught, and it was coherent. It was full sentences. It wasn't like that vocabulary salad that they try to claim that they have. It was almost as if she was having a conversation. I could overhear like a one-sided conversation with somebody on a phone. It was it was like normal kind of thing. And she's talking and she's offering, coffee to these beings. And of course they're saying, oh, well, she's hallucinating, but I could see the other 3 spirits sitting at the table with her. So she wasn't hallucinating. She was in fact seeing these spirits sitting with her at the table that she was conversing with. And they're like, oh, she has schizophrenia. And I mean, of course, at that point in time, being a student, especially, I couldn't come out and say, oh no, she's got visitors, sitting at the table with her, because I not only would have been kicked out of the program, I would have
Hold on
probably.
1 second.
Okay.
Well, that's the way they keep the lid on it, Lynn. That's the way they keep the lid on the whole thing, really. And that's been a
Yes.
subject of what I've spoken about with Jerry over the years. It's quite interesting what you're saying in respect that I was going to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where somebody else has been able to observe these entities also at the same time as yourself?
I have, yes,
Yeah.
I have multiple times, actually. And in other situations, I have a friend of mine, Janet Mathis, who is in my book. She also saw spirit beings the same time that I did in the haunted house it was so bad I was never able to move into it. I also had spiritualists that came into the house that also saw them the same time that I did. And my friend Janet was a nurse that also worked with me in that facility. So, there were even stories of beings. We would see them regularly. It was just something, fortunately I had her, we could talk about it amongst ourselves. Some of the conversations that we were having that did get out amongst other people didn't make them shun what we were saying. They actually would come forward with stories of their own, of things that they had also observed, and and that sort of thing. So
some people believe they have spirit guides and they believe they're being guided. And in my view and in my experience, a lot of the time they're actually being misguided. And that's another part of it, I think, that is very misunderstood, that people will be led by these entities that are low entities, quite malevolent.
yes, absolutely. There are guides that come forward, but keep in mind that some of these spirits mimic, and they will come in. A lot of times, a prime example, there was a gentleman that was channeling his mother, so to speak. He was connected, and he was an empath, and he was connected with his mother. And things continued. She would visit with him whenever he would meditate or something, but then she started to ask him to do things that he knew that his mother would never, in fact, ask him to do. And so he confronted it. And when he confronted it, it started to laugh and kind of dissipated and disappeared. So with that being said, he actually, in order to continue to have, channeling his mother, to make sure that it was actually his mother's spirit and not some manipulative, lower, even demonic spirit coming to visit him, she and he had a password mentally that they conveyed between each other, so that he would ask for the password. So in those times that they would try to approach him again, which they did, they weren't able to give him the password, and he was able to expose them and confront them. And when you do that, they back off. They kind of think that it's almost funny that you've figured them out, but they can't. Once you've figured them out, then their sole purpose for being there is exposed, and they have to, they leave.
These attachments, these demonic entities, have complete access to the person's memory.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've hit a really interesting point here, Lynn. That's why I went to bring Jerry in. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they can mimic anybody you know, and since they're energetic in nature, they're not physical. They're energy beings. There is no time, there is no space, there's no matter where they're at. So they can follow the person anywhere, no matter where he goes, underwater, wherever they can go. Now with the scratches on the back, I remember seeing that really clearly once with a prisoner I was working with at the prison. Pulled him in one morning. He said, I had a horrible night. They attacked me. They scratched my back all up, and he goes, you want to see it? And I said, well, why not? So he lifts his shirt up, and here's these 4 claw marks, like 4 fingers like this, just went all across his back, and you could see where they were bleeding. He couldn't have done that to himself. And if another prisoner did that to him, there would have been a fight. There would have been a lot more damage than just the scratch marks.
Absolutely.
The other thing I found, which kind of really irritates me, is where, they had you sign documents to enter the psych ward in case you were attacked. They make it seem so dangerous that nobody can go on there without fear for their lives.
Yes.
So the average person, any researcher, is not going to be let in there to see or talk to these people. It's too dangerous. We can't let you in there.
It breeds more suspicion and fear.
Yes,
and that's really what keeps the whole thing going, isn't it? Because it's this fear of mental illness. I'm in touch with somebody who's in a secure psychiatric unit who got in touch with me actually through the show. And when they were detained again, I saw the video. It's very disturbing because there's no way out. And these police, they turn up with no numbers on, and that however calm that person keeps, what the end result's going to be. They're going whether they like it or not. And that's very disturbing. And that view is promoted, of course, because the whole idea of schizophrenia, when somebody told me before I knew any better that they had schizophrenia, I was extremely wary of them, especially paranoid schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
And they got you scared.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
it's like, I'm going to stay away from these guys. And this comment that the lady made, don't make eye contact, that is so bizarre. Mm-hmm. These people are dying for attention. Everybody's ignored them. The psychiatrist comes in, sees them for 15, 20 minutes, fills them full of meds, and leaves.
That's true.
They don't
Another thing, Jerry, that's interesting you just brought up is if you look in the eyes, you can see whether they're actually under control or not. And that is a really interesting thing. I remember having this conversation with someone, but there was a battle going on with the eyes because what was in them was trying to take over completely. And it was taken over from this person's conversation. The conversation was superficially there, but the demonic entity was looking right at me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they look through the person's eyes, so they can see and hear everything that's going on because they're actually sharing the patient's senses.
It is the senses. And the thing about that is also mentioning, yes, and any of this fear factor that's around them with the people that are caring for them, as well as any type of negative act that maybe the schizophrenic isn't compelled to or told to, because I believe the voices are not in their head. What I've seen, they're actually being whispered in their ear. And I'll explain that to you. Yeah, they are outside whispering in, they are attachments. But the thing is they feed on that negative energy of fear, anger, any of the chaos and the rippling effect that is created by the mental illness. And they feed on it, and then they're able to do more physical acts, like clawing somebody.
Yeah, exactly. So they come in from the outside, and what they do is they insert thoughts in these people's minds. And we're all taught from the time we're young kids that every thought that comes into your mind belongs to you. That's far from true. Matter of fact, very few are. They're coming in from the good side or the dark side. So like Sherry Sweeney said, every negative thought you have about yourself or anybody else isn't coming from you. That's right. What these things, they don't want people to understand that those thoughts are not their own.
You have to get down to a baseline state where you can monitor what is coming in. And that is something, I don't think many people can do that. I thought more people could do it, but they can't, because when you explain it to them, they've completely misunderstood what you've said. Yeah, they have this constant chatter all the time. And the whole idea of this unified field is that you can be able to sense what's coming in. I mean, and it comes out of the blue, it comes random. You go, wow, that wasn't my thought. Where did that come from? And that's the realization. And that is a very important point to get to. And I think it's the key to a lot of this stuff. I think we've discussed that before, Jerry, so I won't stay on that point too long. But when you go into this, Lynn, do you have any way you protect yourself? Because people need to know this stuff as well. And from my own personal point of view, I just get my whole energy field to be like more complete awareness, so that I have a strong resistance to it. So if anything does come in, you can sense it straight away. Do you use any techniques at all?
Yes. When you are dealing with something this benevolent and negative, you are the person, if you're the one trying to help, you are the one that is under constant attack in your energy field, and it can exhaust you when you're finished. I mean, you could go home and sleep for days. The schizophrenic, it's the same way, because they're draining off of them. They have periods of exhaustion as well. But since you're the enemy, they are constantly attacking you. And it is so important to have your energy field up, to call in whatever guides you use or prayer that you use to protection or necklace. I even had a demonologist recommend carrying a little bit of iron in a little bottle, like iron powder, because because of the iron that they put around the graveyards to keep spirits in, supposedly, back in the day. So to carry those sorts of things indefinitely, your senses have to be on and fully alert, because you just never know, what might be coming at you, and you definitely don't want these things attaching to you and carrying them home.
Exactly, and that's the danger, isn't it? And I think that at this particular time, you were making this point just before we did the show, that this information has never been any more useful than it is now, because with this constant bombardment, as we've said before, Jerry, through the media is like a demonic entity. The whole of the way that this system works to get into your head to control is now openly demonic, and it really is mimicking these entities. Is not known about much these days. And of course, this is what the whole priest class was all about. It was about getting to this stage of protection. Therefore, you could be seen as somebody who was able to be open, but also to have this open truth. And I think that's what the early Christianity was about, which was called the Way. And that was feared by those who were trying to subvert it, because all this they were doing was using a pure energy of truth. And this, I think, has been completely misrepresented in the New Age, and it's become this self-absorbed Luciferian cult, which is, again, another way of bringing in all this negativity and also making people acquiesce to it as well.
I totally concur with what you're saying. A lot of us that are on the planet right now are incarnates.
I've never, ever seen a researcher on any of the psych units that I've ever worked on. They don't let them in there. They do the same thing that they were doing with you. Oh, it's too dangerous. We can't let them in. No, we can't take the risk. You just can't get in there. So the deep state psychiatric mafia, big pharma controlled universities are the ones that put out all this garbage.
Yes.
It's like, oh yeah, the only way to treat these people is with these toxic drugs. No, they don't even know what causes schizophrenia. They're totally clueless. And they're brainwashed in medical school, and big pharma has a big part in making sure that people like us who do put stuff out on that, none of that gets printed in any of the journals.
Or we're discredited. Absolutely.
Or we're discredited, but people sense the truth. They know the truth. Once it gets out there, they can feel it. They can feel it.
Absolutely.
And I had the same experience when I first got onto my first psych ward. After 6 years of psychology and counseling, I finally got access to a clinical population. And that's the first thing I saw too, is here's these guys walking around like they're talking on a telephone, and you can hear one side of the conversation. So when they're teaching us in school, graduate school, hey, well, these are hallucinations, word salad, you think it's nonsense, it just makes no sense. And I was expecting it to be word salad, but here I am hearing them talk coherent sentences, a coherent conversation. They're arguing with these things, they're talking with these things, they're walking around carrying on conversations with, something I don't see. And here they are saying, oh yeah, these are hallucinations, and making you think that whatever they're hearing is just garbage. It's not.
But one quite common thing that I've heard, and not just from you, Jerry, from several other sources, is that when people have become possessed or intruded upon, then a separate voice comes out and basically tells you it's not them.
Well, I've had patients ask these voices, "Who are you?" And they will say, "We are you." They want you to think that those thoughts coming through your head belong to you. And those thoughts are awful. You know, you're no good, you're awful, you're retarded, you're ugly, you're stupid, nobody likes. I mean, it's just a constant bombardment of demeaning, derogatory thoughts constantly, day and night. You know, and the person, you know, in psychiatry saying that too. Oh, these are just hallucinations. You just ignore them. That you can't ignore them. They get louder. You know, I remember one psychiatrist in the state hospital telling a patient that. I called him back a week later and I said, you know, the psychiatrist told you to just ignore your voices. How's that working for you? He said, it's not. They get louder when you ignore them. So I started asking other patients the same thing. What happens when you ignore them? Consistently, they get louder.
And they do seem to be associated with places sometimes.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is not things like the ghost thing, but I think beyond that, I'm talking about really malevolent demonic entities. Do they actually dwell in certain places? What do you think about that?
Yes, they are actually, they find portals to enter into. The house that I had purchased that I was haunted so badly that I was never able to move into, it was determined that there were in fact 2 demons in that house, one of which was a hellhound. The other one was a lower level demon, as well as a young man that had hung himself in the house. And the people that came over to do clearings, the final person that came over told me, she said, you know, if your house had been built over 3 feet from where it was, it wouldn't have been haunted. And she said, she pointed to the house catty corner across the street from mine and said, I bet that house is haunted, and the one behind it, because of the ley lines or some type of vortex or tunneling coming through portals that they did.
It's got a bridge underneath, which was used a lot by Satanists. There's a lot of symbols there. Well, apparently when dogs run across the bridge, often they just jump over it and die.
Oh, I heard about that.
I heard about that.
Yeah, but the documentary is really stupid because someone comes on and says, well, dogs don't commit suicide. Well, no one actually said they did. I mean, something's getting into them to make them do it. They don't just go there and feel, oh, this place is going to make me feel terrible. I'm going to jump to my death. You know what I mean? Dogs don't do that. Well, something gets into them and makes them do it, which is really, really strange and obviously quite powerful.
Yes, and also they put the imprint in their mind so that perhaps they jump off the bridge thinking that they're continuing on. And as far as the demonic thing, yes, they do. However, the demons are entering into our third dimension through portals. And I can share with you quickly the way to determine whether your mirror is a portal or not is that if you go to your mirror and you put your finger up to it, the reflection appears like this. It is a mirror. But if there is a gap, it is a portal. And that's something that you do not want in your house. Because I have the ability to see spirits and attachments, I have the gift of second sight. So it has come in very, very handy in my profession as a nurse, end-of-life care, assisting people to cross over and seeing their loved ones come in, as well as going into situations, clearing houses and things like that, where there have been some very malevolent spirits on them, and also being able to see on that young woman the attachments that were on her back, and also on addictive personalities that were in the facility, these Arconian type attachments that were on the backs of people with addiction that look like spiders, crabs, or reptilian, and they position like neat backpacks on their backs. The reptilian sometimes has a tail that coils and attaches at the hip, sometimes no tail, but it has a human buttocks. And the thing that's very distinct about these is that their head, in comparison to their body, is very, very small. And it kind of comes up and shows itself over the shoulder sometimes. Sometimes it aligns directly with the back of the head. But the heads being small, and they have a fin type flap on the back of their head, starting from the top to the base of where the neck would be. But it's not rigid like a dolphin. It's floppy, like a handkerchief, like a kerchief on someone's head. But they have that, and it's very distinct. And they literally continue to and they're malevolent entities. They're not something that is good, and they constantly coerce the person to continue, drinking. Oh, you want that, you want it. And that's why it's very, very hard for people to get away from addiction, because they are constantly, these things, they have a feeding ground on the person, and they relish off of the negativity that the addiction causes with the rippling effect of job loss and messing up their marriage and things like that. So they feed on it. And of course, the archonic things don't want to detach. So they want to constantly encourage the person to go back to their drinking or to their drug addiction. Once the person has come to terms with that, I mean, the archon detaches. However, it never leaves. It always remains.
That's why alcoholics can not. Basically, they have to stop drinking completely because they can't stop.
Exactly.
It's that's driving the addiction.
Yeah.
And that's the same.
I've heard the same thing from a lot of alcoholics I worked with. It's not just them doing the drinking. These spirits can't get drunk in a spiritual form. They have to find a body. So they jump in there and they ask for more. You can go into the bar and just hang out with your friends, kind of just inch them along until they get them drinking again. So it's not just the person who's drinking or drugging. That's right. These spirits that are attached to them.
Yeah, the spirit, the thing just basically drives them into drinking. But conversely, people get really drunk and have things jump into them. So you can't really win with it. It's best not to,
Well, the first thing that's got to be done is that they have to realize that those voices aren't them. So they have to break that. They have to realize those voices are coming from somewhere else. They're not them, that they don't mean them any good. A lot of times they start off thinking, my mind is broken. And that's exactly what psychiatry tells them. Yeah, your mind is broken. You got a chemical imbalance. There's nothing you can do about it except take these toxic drugs. We're going to dish you out. It's a life sentence. No, they have to realize it's not them, that these things aren't for them, that they're liars. They lie about everything. And all they want to do is get their energy. But they have to turn their emotional state negative before they can access their energy. So they'll fill them full of all kinds of garbage in their heads. They'll try to get them to do things that get them in trouble, which generate that negative emotional energy to start with. And I'll tell you, the prison was a hog's trough for these things. I mean, you could just walk into the door of that prison and you could just feel it. It was a feeding frenzy there.
Absolutely.
She also says his eyes were black. Well, we've seen that. We've talked about that before. That's pretty scary when you see full-on possession and the eyes go black and the mouth can foam and anything can happen.
Yeah.
And then when that gets in, it's very, very dangerous.
So, another thing that they can do is create pain. And a lot of times people, when they have that pain, they are innocently seeking relief and then they become addicted to medication. And that has happened. I also, I know that this sounds totally absurd and I totally agree with the 23rd Psalm. It's an excellent one. However, as also Mark had mentioned too, the lack of fear. If you can remain neutral, they have nothing to feed off of and it keeps them in a weakened state.
It stops there, the thing's escalating as well, because
Yes.
things can get completely out of hand, and that's where people can get killed. And that I've experienced that situation, and it does seem to work, that if you can stay completely calm, centered, but with that resilient energy and purity of your own spirit.
They don't like them to be happy at all. They will destroy any happiness they can. They'll also destroy relationships. That's one of the first things they go after.
Absolutely.
Yep. The wife, he's cheating on him, and the husband tells, that they're cheating on each other. They put all kinds of thoughts in their head about how bad these people are. They don't like people having any kind of positive relationship.
Well, you can notice it coming in. I've noticed this over the years. You think something's getting in the way here, and doubts are being planted, and you can see it.
Yep, they like to isolate. Absolutely.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's the worst thing you could let one of your, if you're a mom or dad, you got a son or daughter who's schizophrenic. The worst thing you can do is let them isolate in their room by themselves, because then they're totally isolated with those voices, and those voices are working on them 24 hours a day. They need to get distracted, do something else that they like to do. That's the worst thing you could do. And the infected person will drive off the mom and the dad or other relatives. They don't want them around. They'll make themselves so obnoxious that they can stay in the room by themselves. But it's not them doing it. It's the
That's
voices
true.
doing it.
Crank up some music. That changes the mood right there. Just to try to do something.
But you got to watch what kind you turn on. That
exactly.
Rap music. No negative TV, no negative movies, no war stories. Stay away from the news, because the news is basically mimicking what the schizophrenics hear.